Sziasztok! Ebben a kétrészes podcast sorozatban Samantha Shannonnal készíthettem interjút, amit most már ti is hallhattok, illetve láthattok. Ez a felvétel akkor készült, amikor a szerző legutoljára Magyarországra látogatott, hogyha lemaradtatok volna erről, ne csüggedjetek, nem sokára találkozhattak a szerzővel, ezt a leírásban részletezem is. A kétrészes sorozat első részében nagyon fontos témákat feszegettünk, a szerző inspirációit, a karrierje kezdetét, kezdeti nehézségeket, valamint a női főszereplők fontosságát a fantasy könyvekben. Ha további inspirációra vagytok kíváncsiak, illetve arra, hogy hogyan és milyen technikákkal építi ezeket a nagyon-nagyon részletes világokat, akkor nézzétek meg a sorozat második részét is. De addig is jó szórakozást az elsőhöz!
Your novels, The Priory of the Orange Tree and The Day of Fallen Night, explore themes such as power, identity, and destiny. How did you come about exploring these subjects specifically?
Well, it started off with my fascination with the legend of St. George and the Dragon, and I was really interested in how that story had changed over the generations and how different versions of it had ended up being condensed into a simpler modern version. So that gave me an interest in stories and how we use stories to sometimes to maintain power or take it away, to create a sense of identity. So I suppose it really started with storytelling, and then that extended into subjects like hereditary monarchy, for example, and legacy, and how different ideas about the same story could be used to found different religions, for example.
Why do you think these themes resonate with the readers? Why do you think it's such a success?
Well, I suppose, royalty in particular has always been quite a fascination in fantasy. And I try not to just write about royal characters, but it does allow you to grapple with themes like, unchecked power, like inheritance and, the pressures to continue a monarchy over time. I think it's interesting as an author because you don't know what your readers are going to bring to a book with them. And every single reader has a slightly different life experience. So you never really know what themes or quotes are going to resonate with specific readers. But that's just such a wonderful thing about telling stories, is that you're not really just writing one book, you're writing hundreds of thousands of books, like kind of one that is viewed in so many different ways by every reader through many different lenses.
Yeah, I guess history repeats itself, so these stories will always be relevant.
Absolutely, yeah.
In some way. You started your writing journey relatively early. Can you tell us about that? How did that impact your life?
Sure. So I started writing, I think I wrote my first book when I was about 9, and I tried to send it to Penguin, but I just wrote on the envelope to Penguin and then put it in the letterbox. So I never saw that story again. But I wrote a novel called Aurora when I was 15, after I started writing as a committed hobby when I was about 12. I sent that to publishers and it was rejected because it wasn't very good. Okay. Then I ended up writing The Bone Season when I was 19, and I was in it was the summer between my first and second years at university. And I was very lucky that it got picked up by a publisher when I was 20. That's where my journey began. It was an interesting experience being published so young, because I think a lot of people dream about being published young for some reason, and I certainly did. I think it's this glamorization of being, a young author. Yeah. For me, I have very mixed feelings on that, because I recognise that if The Bone Season hadn't been picked up at that exact moment, it might never have been picked up, because timing is so important in publishing, and making sure your book finds the right editor at the right time when certain genres are popular. This was kind of towards the tail end of the dystopian fiction era, so I was lucky it got picked up when it did. But as is apparent from the fact that I've now rewritten the Bone Season series, because I was so young, I feel like I maybe was too young for the ambition and scope of the story that I was telling. So I'm very lucky I've been able to rewrite the series now. I've had 10 years more experience. But for me, I think the important message is that you shouldn't rush to be published at a young age. Like, there's really no need for it. There's plenty of authors who started in their 40s or later. It's really, take it from someone who was published when they were 21 years. It's not necessary to do that.
Okay. And what inspired you at the time?
What, to be a writer or to write the Bone Season specifically?
Either way.
Well, the story of the Bone Season, I was at Oxford University, and for me, Oxford, it's often thought of as quite a magical place, but for me, I found it quite overwhelming and oppressive. And I was not from a private school background, I was from a state school, and I felt like I didn't really belong there. I just felt like an imposter for most of the time. And I imagined the city as being this very dark and frightening place, and that's when I came up with the idea of setting a dystopian type of story set there that would grapple with themes like privilege and how power is distributed unfairly even within Oxford itself. I separately came up with an idea. I've always lived in London, I love London, and I came up with this idea of basing a story in Seven Dials, which is a district of London that sells, well, at the time it sold crystal balls and tarot cards and had palm readings and that kind of thing. And I became really interested in the idea of a magic system that used clairvoyance as its basis. And I probably could have written 2 separate novels, but I ended up combining them into one book, which became The Bone Season.
For the 10th anniversary of the Bone Season, you decided to rewrite and to republish the books. How did that happen? It's not a common thing.
No, it's really not. I don't think any author has done it to the extent that I have. Like, there have been authors' preferred texts before, but not to this entire rewrite extent. So it was the 10th anniversary of the first Bone Season book, which came out in 2013, and my publisher said that they wanted to give it a new cover. And I decided to ask if I could edit it, because I've always wanted to edit the first book in the series just because I was so young when I wrote it, and I felt like the first book had so much more potential than I had had the skill to realise at the time. And I was very lucky that my publisher allowed me to do this. So I edited myself. I acted as an editor of my younger self, which was really interesting and very cathartic. And then I decided that since I'd done that, I might as well edit the other books as well. So it is a complete revision. The story is fundamentally the same, but it adds more detail. It's hopefully a more accessible experience, that the world building isn't quite so overwhelming and is woven through the story a little more skillfully, I hope. So what I would say is that if readers have not yet started the Bone Season, I would prefer them to read the revised texts, which are available in Hungarian. So there aren't a huge number of changes to the story, but there are some characters who are developed a little bit more. Like, there were 2 characters in the original version of the Bone Season who didn't have names or personalities really, and I decided to give those to them because that made more sense. There are some extended scenes, some small additions to the story, so it's not only designed for new readers of the series, but so that people who already like the series will be able to reread it and discover something new, and hopefully it gives a little bit more depth to the world.
Your books often feature strong female protagonists. Can you discuss the importance of portraying them in fantasy books?
Yeah, so I feel that throughout history, women have been not considered the default kind of human being. Even the word woman is othering in some way. It kind of, man was the default word for a human at one point. And I've always been frustrated by that. And I wanted my books are partly about men. There are often male perspective characters, but I really wanted to centre being a woman and different kinds of women. I didn't just want to reflect one experience, but many. So A Day of Fallen Night particularly deals with motherhood and different choices about motherhood. So there's characters who don't want to be mothers, who do want to be mothers, who have lost their children. It's basically just showing lots of different perspectives on womanhood. And I also do that in the Bone Season series. I have a female main character, but she doesn't have to deal with sexism, which was a really interesting process for me, thinking about how she would have a romance with a man, for example, in a world that is devoid of patriarchy. So I like playing with the female experience in lots of different ways and celebrating lots of different kinds of strength in women. So some of my women are warriors and they can kill dragons, but not all of them can. I mean, I can't use a sword, so I wanted that experience represented. Some of them are great politicians and leaders like Sabran, or some of them are nurturers or healers. So there's lots of different ways that you can be strong.